Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and I am here for my LCK playoff primer video. This is going to be everything you need to know about the end of the LCK regular season, heading into the most fun time of the year for LCK and League of Legends fans as a whole here with playoff time. If you guys haven't checked out the LPL video, firstly, I highly recommend it. It's going to be up in the iCard right now. I really implore you check it out. We put a lot of work and effort into these videos, and I promise you will not be disappointed. But a lot of you who did check it out seem to really enjoy it, so I'm really excited to be bringing you the LCK version here today. A lot of good stuff to talk about. The weekly recaps are over. The regular season is over. It is time to get into the playoffs. So, in this video, we are going to be covering the awards, my mock MVP, Rookie of the Year, and all three of my All-Pro teams. Now, this isn't a predictive mock. This is more of a what I would do, who I think I would put in my All-Pro if I, quote-unquote, had a vote. And then we'll move on to going over all 6 teams that made the LCK playoffs here. Obviously, we'll cover the first 2 in a little bit of a different manner than we cover some of the first round matchups, and that's going to be a lot of fun, key matchup included. And then finally, we're going to finish out this video with a full bracket prediction for the LCK playoffs. So if you guys are excited, please go ahead and leave a like. And I usually don't do this at the beginning of videos, but these videos were so fun to make, and they took so much effort that I really do implore you to hit the subscribe button if you really like what you see here. And obviously, we're going to be pumping out a bunch more of these playoff primer videos and also playoff reviews here of all of the games that happen in all 4 major regions. So if you don't want to miss any of that, hit the subscribe button and even hit the bell. I've heard that's really helped a lot of people find the channel a little easier. So if you guys want to do that, obviously we've got some great content lined up. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into the MVP award. And the big one here, it's the big one. Everybody wants to know who my MVP pick is. I feel like a lot of people know it's down to between 2 people for me. And for me, the MVP of the 2022 summer split in the LCK is Ruler. And I know some people are going to be upset by that. Some people really want to see Prince here. But for me, Ruler played completely out of his mind. You could argue that this might be the best split that he's ever had. And this is arguably, you know, one of, if not the greatest AD carry to ever play the game. He was phenomenal for a Gen.G team that really just felt like they could not be beaten this year. Not only was he good on aggressive picks, he was good on scaling picks as well, whether he wanted to play the Jinx or whether they played a lot of Lucian Nami, which they did this year. And obviously, he was kind of the exception to the Lucian Nami rule. Or the Zeri, obviously everybody playing well on the Zeri. It felt like Ruler was able to control the game in the early game, was able to translate any lead he had into late game. His positioning was nearly perfect, and his impact on the game I just thought was bigger than almost anybody else's in the world this year for a team that, quite frankly, couldn't buy a loss here in summer. So really excited to give Ruler my MVP award here. Obviously, Gen.G is a really good team, and you'd like to see Ruler keep this up, but looking at the Player of the Game awards, he had 12 in the LCK. Obviously, they played a few more games than the LPL did here, but looking at the Player of the Series, that's my personal Player of the Series count throughout the summer split. I gave him 7. That is quite a few. That is actually more than anybody else in the LCK, with the exception of Prince, who had him tied at 7. So a very close call, but when you're on the best team and you have the most Player of the Series and it backs it up on tape, not only are you good in lane, you're good out of lane, your positioning's perfect, you never really give away bad deaths. That to me is an MVP caliber season, and it clearly makes you one of the best players in the entire world, which I think we can all say that Ruler is. But I've been talking about Prince quite a bit. He's going to come in second place. It was a very close second place. Ruler and Prince were kind of at each other's throats for the MVP race all year long, but Ruler was just a little bit better in my eyes this year. Prince, I think, meant a little bit more maybe to his team. That team is most certainly not sitting at the 3 seed without Prince, but Ruler is sitting at the number 1 team, and he has clearly been the best player on that team. For me, that is an MVP caliber year, so I'm happy to hand out that award to him. But yeah, Prince comes in second, and then in third place for my MVP voting, I have Peanut, also from Gen.G. I think those 3 players were probably the most impactful players in the LCK this split. But obviously, I'm not going to criticize you if you want to go one way or the other on either of these 80 carries. I just want to sit back and appreciate what an awesome year we got from both of these players, and I really want to congratulate Ruler because it really feels like he is really unlocked with this new roster, with Chovy coming in, with the Hens coming in at support, Peanut being a super supportive jungler. I feel like he has been completely unlocked, and he finally might have a shot at hoisting his first ever LCK trophy. Moving on to the second major award that I'll be giving out here, and that is the Rookie of the Year for 2022 in the LCK, and honestly, this one is an absolute no-brainer, almost more so than any award I will be giving out the rest of the year. This one was the least amount of effort. It was so obvious. The Rookie of the Year for everybody in the LCK is going to be Zeus on T1. It really just isn't close. This guy is a top-tier top laner. I think you could make a real argument that he is the best top laner in the world, and he was a rookie this year. So yeah, you know what? That's Rookie of the Year quality for me. Not only was he on a very good team, I think you could have made a really strong case to Zeus being not only the best player on T1, but the most clutch player when they went to MSI. A lot of that team really started to struggle, but Zeus did not. He actually performed really well at MSI, even when the team wasn't doing super hot. Comes back here to the LCK, and he has pretty unanimously, at least in my opinion, been that team's best player in summer, and now they finished second in the regular season. They're, you know, primed to make another Worlds run here. This was an absolute no-brainer. I don't think I have to explain to you why Zeus was good. He was good on the tanks. He was good on the carries. You can see a bunch of games of Gnar, bunch of games of Gangplank, bunch of games of Gwen. There was also quite a few Sejuani games this split. It really didn't matter. Anything that you put Zeus on, he did well on. Even the Fiora pick was brought out a couple of times for Zeus, something that I thought really showcased his ability to take over the map with his really good macro sense and his just insane mechanics. This guy was hyped up coming into the year. Everybody knew he was going to be an absolute beast, but I'm not sure anybody could have expected a complete emergence that he had this year. He has pretty clearly become the best top laner in the LCK and very nearly one of the best in the world. 11 LCK Player of the Game awards. That is unbelievable that he had such a dominant year for such a good team, and he absolutely deserves it. Some honorable mentions here also with the award. You've got Kale for Liiv SANDBOX, who I think is going to fall a little bit under the radar because of how well Prince played, but a lot of what Prince was able to do, he was able to do because of the great synergy that he had with Kale. I really want to give props where it is due. Kale had one of the most phenomenal, rookie years that we've seen in quite a while out of a support in the LCK, and unfortunately, in almost any other year, he would be Rookie of the Year, but with Zeus here, unfortunately, he was just never in the conversation, but he is a very clear-cut number 2 for me. And then another player that I want to shout out is Vikla, coming into KT Rolster. Obviously, coming in midway, partway through the season to replace Arya. He did a great job. Once he came in, I'm not going to say it was all him, but that team really got unlocked. They started to get completely online, and now they pushed their way into playoffs. Vikla is a part of that. Maybe he's not the biggest, but he is certainly a part of that. Coming in, he's been able to go even or win a lot of mid lane matchups, and honestly, I've really been impressed with his recent play in the last couple weeks. His late game team fighting has been phenomenal overall. So those 3 I definitely think deserve honorable mentions, but Zeus is clear and away the top pick here, and I don't really think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be arguing that decision. That's going to bring us into our all-pro teams. So now that the main awards are done, we get to talk about the first team, the second team, and the third team all-pro in LCK Summer of 2022. And of course, the disclaimer still applies that this is just my opinion. Obviously, hopefully you guys trust my opinion at this point. I've been doing weekly recaps on the region all year long. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp. I've watched every single game that the LCK has produced. So what are my all-pro picks? Well, let's go ahead and start with the best of the best. Let's start with the first team all-pro, the number 1 player in each of their positions, and it is up on the screen now. We are going to go over and talk about them from top to support here. In the top lane, I've got Zeus from T1. In the jungle, Peanut from Gen.G. In the mid lane, Chovy from Gen.G. In the bot lane, Ruler from Gen.G. And then at support, Keria from T1. A lot of familiar colors here. 2 teams representing the entire first team, and I think that's pretty indicative of how the split went. We're going to go over all of these players individually. We'll go from top to support here. We'll start with Zeus. I already did a bit of a deep dive on him, but that was more in the sense of his rookie year. Let's talk about him overall as a player. Not only was he able to unlock a lot of what T1 wanted to do, but the difference between him and what anybody else was really able to offer, I actually think might be T1 being a top team in the world. And that really says all that you need to know about Zeus. He has been unlocked more so than almost anybody on that roster because the resources are happily given to him. Owner obviously is a very aggressive jungler, but he does a very good job of pathing around the map and making sure that the team has resources. Zeus often is the recipient, and he turns those leads not only into early game success, but into late game success as well. Really, really like how he's played. Moving on to the jungle position, Peanut was a pretty easy choice for me as the first team All-Pro jungler. He was just unbelievable at taking over the map and making sure that his team had full control to do whatever they wanted to do. Sometimes it can be really difficult to play jungler for a top team or a loaded team with a bunch of lanes that want your attention. But Peanut did it pretty much masterfully. Not only did Chovy get all the resources he needed, not only did Ruler get all the resources he needed, not only did Doran usually get the resources he needed, but Peanut was able to get ahead in a lot of matchups too, and actually do a lot in the late game. It's one of the more impressive jungle performances I've seen in quite a long time. Peanut has been considerably underrated in my opinion for many years now. I think a lot of people honestly just forgot about him, but he's been so good even for teams that quite frankly weren't amazing. He finally gets the opportunity to play with some amazing laners here, and he really shows up. He was in my MVP conversation. I think that's how well Peanut played this split. Moving on to the mid lane, this one's pretty much a no-brainer. It's Chovy. He's just the most talented player in the LCK, and he proved it this year. Obviously, you can talk about the fact that he had a ton of talent surrounding him. He had a lot of good players feeding into his system, but you know what? He took advantage and he capitalized on those players being on his team. It's not easy to always play with a bunch of superstars. And I know that sounds like a weird thing to say, but resources are scarce in League of Legends. You can't give it to everybody. And I think what impressed me most about Chovy this year was his ability to say, okay, I'm not the carry this game. I'm going to play passive. I'm going to play the Talia. I'm going to help out the rest of my team. And I'm going to let Ruler carry. I'm going to let Peanut carry. And he absolutely excelled at that role. That was something that I think a lot of people criticized Chovy for, was that it very much felt like he was a resource-heavy player that wasn't very good at letting the other people on his team carry. But you know what? He did a great job of taking a secondary role and still stepping up when he needed to in the regular season. Hopefully he can maintain that, because if he can, I find it very difficult for Gen.G to be beaten. Obviously, we've got Ruler here on the first team. I shouldn't have to explain to you why he's here. He was my MVP pick for a reason. He was so phenomenal this year. When you have a Hall of Fame legendary career, when you're arguably the greatest AD carry of all time, and you can make a real case that this split was your best ever, you absolutely deserve first team, and so he gets it here. And then Keria was my support pick. I really think I went back and forth on him and Lehens here for first team, but I ended up with Keria. I thought Lehens was very good for Gen.G, but I thought he just had a few too many moments where I was a little bit concerned with how he played. Keria didn't have any of those moments. While maybe he wasn't quite as flashy with his picks, especially as someone like Lehens was, he was so ridiculously consistent all year long, not only in the early game, making sure that pretty much everybody on the map got a lead. He was phenomenal in the early game, but he also does a great job in the late game of transitioning that. I was a little bit worried with how Keria would play transitioning out of an engager meta, but he has picked up the enchanters, he's picked up the more passive picks, and he's really excelled. And that's been incredibly impressive, and that's the reason I think Keria is sitting here in first team, is just truly, I believe that even more so than what we've seen, he was the most important support, I think, to his team in the LCK, and so he finishes out the first team here. Moving on to the second team now. We've gone over the best of the best, but who were narrowly missing out on that moniker? Well, they're going to be up on the screen right now. My second team All-Pro for LCK Summer of 2022. Let's go over it top to support. I've got Rascal from KT Rolster in the top lane, Owner from T1 in the jungle, Zika from DRX in the mid lane, Prince from Liiv SANDBOX in the bot lane, and Lehens from Gen.G at support. A lot of really talented players here that I think just narrowly missed out on my cut for first team. Let's go ahead and go over it from top to support here. I've got Rascal in the top lane. Now, some people might really like this, some people might not like this, but if you follow the channel for any considerable amount of time, you know that I am much higher, I think, on Rascal than a majority of other people in the world. I think he's criminally underrated as a carry player and someone who can actively make your team better when you dump resources into him at a high level. And I think he showed that at multiple points this year. Obviously, KT found a little bit of a different way to play the game through bot lane, maybe than they were used to, but Rascal did a great job of still maintaining and capturing his own resources while not being a hindrance to the rest of his team. Obviously, he had some games this split that weren't phenomenal, but I think overall his split was very positive, and I think, quite frankly, in a league where top lane is a little bit weak overall in terms of talent, I think Rascal was a very clear-cut choice for number 2. Nobody other than maybe Zeus was more influential in his team's wins this year from the top lane position than Rascal. I have Owner in the jungle in the second team. Obviously, he was very good this year. Peanut was phenomenal, though, so unfortunately, Owner drops down here to the second team. I don't think that is a disgrace to how he played at all, though. He did a great job. Very similar to what I was talking about with Peanut. It can sometimes be very difficult to play with a bunch of stars. Now, obviously, for T1, it's a little bit different because the game plan and the mentality on that team is very different than, like, Chovy Ruler, right? But still, Faker Gumayushi is a pretty good mid-jungle duo, and you also want to give a lot of resources up to Zeus in the top lane. And I think Owner did a very good job of not only gaining leads against his jungle opponent, but transitioning those leads into gold leads for almost every single lane. He worked very well with Keria, who did make my first team, to create the situation on the map where it was very difficult for pretty much anybody else who was going into them to stop him. So yeah, Owner absolutely deserves second team All-Pro. He out-jungled pretty much everybody in the league with the exception of maybe Peanut. Now, where we get a little bit controversial is here in the mid lane. I think a lot of people are going to want to see someone other than Zika here in second team All-Pro, but for me, this was a pretty easy decision. He was so underratedly great for DRX, and in my opinion, he was clearly their best player throughout a majority of the year. I think a lot of people want to talk about Deft being their best player, and I think you can make a case that Deft was the best player in their losses, but pretty much every win that DRX got, especially the big ones, the big upsets, most notably over DAMWON, Zika played completely out of his mind. He was really good at living up to the competition that he was playing against and being the best player that he possibly could be in those scenarios. Now, obviously, he wasn't always perfect, but oftentimes he was let down by his jungler, he was let down by his support. The macro on the team just simply wasn't there for him to be able to take over in the same way that maybe some other mid laners had. But in terms of actual performance and how he played in Summer Split, I have a really hard time seeing Zika as anything worse than the second best mid laner in the region. Moving on to bot lane, I've talked about him quite a bit already, but this is the first time in the video he's on the screen. Prince here for Liiv SANDBOX. Talk about someone who 1v9'd for a lot of this split. Now, obviously, I'm not trying to take away what SANDBOX has in terms of talent. I do really like Krakow. I do really like Kale. But Prince is Liiv SANDBOX. This team is sitting at third in the standings, and a lot of that is just due to how good he was. He was very nearly my MVP, and unfortunately, he misses the first team because the actual MVP is the same role as him. So definitely unfortunate there, but Prince played absolutely out of his mind. A career-defining performance. This is someone who I could very realistically see being picked up by a major team in the offseason, or if SANDBOX keeps him spending a ton of money to build a team around him that is capable of being world champions. He is a world champion caliber bot laner, and he proved that over the course of this split. He was genuinely phenomenal in all facets of the game. And then moving on to support, we have Lehens, and I think there's a real case to be made that Lehens should be first team here. His synergy with Ruler was amazing, and it really unlocked what Ruler was able to do, and that's a big reason why Ruler was MVP. However, Lehens just had a few too many moments in the season where I was like, I just don't understand. And Lehens has always kind of been that player where he's willing to take those giant risks. Sometimes they pay off, and a lot of times because of the talent level on that team, they do pay off, but unfortunately, they don't always pay off, and that can be a little bit of a hindrance when you have such a stable player like Ruler having to play from behind at times. And so Lehens barely falls into my second team, but really the difference between first team and second team at support is very minimal. You could tell me that Lehens was better, and I'd believe you. You could tell me Keria was better, and I'd believe you. Lehens was a very good player, and he unlocked a lot of what Gen.G wanted to do with his aggressive playstyle and his amazing versatility in draft that I think we're all aware of at this point. So those are my second team all pro players. I think all of them absolutely deserve it, even if some of them are going to be a little bit underrated in the eyes of most fans. Moving on to our third team now. Now, there's going to be a lot of surprising players on this third team, either for good or for bad. I think some people are going to see some very recognizable faces all the way down here at third team and some newcomers down here at third team. So up on the screen now, you're going to see it. A lot of really interesting picks. I'll go over it from top to support here. I've got in the top lane, Kingen from DRX. In the jungle, Canyon from DAMWON KIA. In the mid lane, Faker from T1. In the bot lane, Aiming from KT Rolster. And at support, Kale from Liiv SANDBOX. Now, there's a good mix of, I think, young players that I don't think a lot of people expected. Some career resurgences here, and then maybe some players who you're more used to seeing in the first team conversation than the third team conversation. But let's go ahead and talk about it from top to support here. Let's start with Kingen. In the top lane, Kingen is someone who I've honestly been very critical of on this channel ever since he joined DRX. Hell, even in the LPL, I was very critical of how Kingen was performing as a top laner, but man, if he wasn't consistent this year. Top lane really wasn't this dominant role where you had multiple people who were able to carry games for their team, but Kingen had some moments this season where I was like, okay, like, step up, like, get better, and honestly, it felt like somehow this was maybe his best split of his career. I really do believe that he was that good. And it was the fact that not only was he doing well, but he wasn't being a huge hindrance for his team in his losses, which I think is a huge development for him as someone who was, quite frankly, you know, before this, he was someone who would run it down a little bit when he was behind, but he's gotten much better about being patient in the top lane, and it's given him a lot of opportunities to gain leads against top laners that I think a lot of people would consider better than him. And so I think he very much deserves this third team All-Pro, even if it doesn't look like it maybe on paper. I think he had a very underratedly good split overall. But moving on to the jungle position, we got Canyon. You know, maybe the greatest jungler of all time, falls all the way down here to third team All-Pro. Just wasn't the most consistent of splits for Canyon. I've defended him quite a bit on this channel. I think there are a lot of people out there that would say that Canyon had a bad split, and that is something that I just quite frankly don't agree with almost at all. I thought Canyon was good for a significant amount of this split. It just wasn't consistent with him. He would have games where he would completely dominate and completely carry his team to a win, and he would also have games where he was almost a non-factor and would get out-jungled. Now, I'm not saying that that is good or bad for their chances in playoffs. What I am saying is that Canyon often dictated the pace at which DAMWON could play the game. When he was on, they won, and when he was off, they lost. But at the end of the day, they still made playoffs. Yes, they're not the unbeatable giants that they've been for the past 2 years, but this is still a good DAMWON KIA team, and I still believe that Canyon is the engine that makes DAMWON run. And I don't imagine that they make playoffs if Canyon doesn't have a lot of those superhuman performances. So even if he wasn't the most consistent of players, his highs are definitely high enough to justify him here on the third team. And then you have Faker, the GOAT, here in the mid lane in the third team. Honestly, for a lot of the year, I simply didn't even have Faker in the All-Pro conversation. And that's not to say he wasn't playing well, but I talked about this a lot on my weekly recap series. It really felt like Faker was the one taking most of a backseat on T1 for a majority of the year. He was the one that was getting the least amount of resources, and he was the one that was given the least amount of opportunity to carry. But I think in recent weeks, I've realized how much T1 was toying around with drafts, how much they were toying around with who they want to give resources to, how much they were essentially playing with the formula to see what worked and to see what didn't. And in the last few weeks, when Faker has been given the opportunity to carry, he finally got his RE pick in week 9 here, the final week of the regular season. He was very successfully able to dominate. And so for me, Faker was good this year, not elite because he wasn't given all of the opportunities that maybe some other mid laners were, but still a very consistently great mid that easily comes in for third team here. You know, maybe some surprise here over Showmaker. Showmaker kind of falls off the list because of it, but Faker does make it here on third team. My third team ADC, I definitely had some debate here, but I ended up settling on Aiming. And Aiming had a real career resurgence here, kind of similar to what Kingen had, but Aiming was much better than Kingen this year, quite frankly. This bot lane position in the LCK was ridiculously stacked. Aiming was the lifeblood, the heart and soul of this KT Rolster team for a majority of the year. Around week 4, week 5, something just clicked for Aiming. Him and Life developed a phenomenal chemistry, and he was really able to start taking over games. We've always known that Aiming has been a phenomenal team fighter, great at positioning, but Aiming's weakness has always been his inability to go even in lane, and that's been true pretty much his entire career. And while that didn't completely flip for KT, he still is, not the strongest lane player. I think Life has really helped out his laning phase to the point where now he can get to that late game and he can actively win his team games against some tough competition. Pretty much any team in the league, I think Aiming beat in this split, and that was really impressive to watch. He very much deserves 3rd team overall. It was very close to going to Gumayushi here. I think Guma gets a lot of flack from T1 fans for how he played this year, and I think it is, in my opinion, mostly unwarranted. I thought he was really good, but we'll get to that later. Aiming very much deserves his spot here over Guma. I think he was a little bit more important to his team's success, so he finds his way onto the 3rd team All-Pro. And then Kale, the rookie here at support, coming in as the 3rd team support. He had a phenomenal chemistry with Prince throughout the entire year, but it really wasn't just that. Kale showed a lot of things to me to show that he wasn't just someone who was with a very good AD carry. He had a very good sense of macro, and his champion pool is quite wide. It was very impressive to see someone so new to the league feel like such a veteran when they were playing. That's how I felt with Kale for a majority of the year. Not only was he good in lane, he was good out of lane, and there were games where Prince was a little bit down in lane, and he did something incredible to take over that laning phase, to give Prince the opportunity to come back, and then Prince was able to capitalize on that and scale into oblivion. Kale did a phenomenal job of enabling pretty much everything Liiv SANDBOX wanted to do. Him and Krako have a great synergy, and I imagine that core of Krako, Prince, and Kale is something that Liiv SANDBOX is going to want to try to build around for years to come. But yes, those are my all-pro teams. There are going to be a lot of people that I think you like in it and a lot of people you don't like. Let me know how you feel about that down in the comment section below. You know I love chatting it up with you guys. But now that we're done with awards, it's time to get into the teams. Moving on to our team analysis section. We are done with the awards. We're done with my MVP, done with my Rookie of the Year, done with the All-Pro teams. Those have all been done. Now it is time to go over all 6 of the teams that were fortunate enough to make the LCK Summer Playoffs here. Now we'll be going over the first 2 in a little bit more of an overview style format because they don't have matchups yet. They get buys in the first round. And then we're going to be going over the matchups that we have in round 1. Some very interesting ones there. But of course, we are going to be starting off with our number 1 team in the LCK regular season, and it's Gen.G. They felt pretty much unbeatable for a majority of the regular season. It was incredibly fun to watch, and this team just feels stacked from top to bottom. You look at, this format might be a little bit familiar to you guys, not only if you watch the playoff primer from yesterday, but if you watch the mid-season player reviews or the player rankings earlier this year. Obviously a little bit retooled here, but some really interesting things on the screen. Obviously, Gen.G, their win of the split, their loss of the split against the same team. They only lost 1 series all year long, all split long, and that was to T1. And also, it was pretty big that they were able to avenge that loss there in week 7. They looked very good throughout a majority of the split. Not even T1 could consistently dethrone them. Even in their loss, they still looked pretty good in a 2-1 loss. It was a very close series. So overall, I thought Gen.G was really entertaining to watch, and it's mostly because look at the talent on this team. It's actually unbelievable. Doran, Peanut, Chovy, Ruler, Lehens, like, I know we all knew that was a super team at the beginning of the year, but it looks even more like a super team after we've seen them play. This is unreal that they were able to assemble this collection of talent onto one roster, and it's really paid dividends for them. A lot of times super teams don't necessarily connect. I've talked about this a few times in the video where when you have so many players who are used to playing with resources, it can be difficult to ask them to take a little bit of a step back in order to benefit the whole team, but it really feels like everybody here on Gen.G has done that. Chovy and Ruler are both hyper carries, probably the 2 most talented players in the LCK. And they're on the same team, and both of them are very good at playing passive as well. Now, That's a new development for Chovy, which is a good thing. Obviously, I'm glad that he developed it, but it is worth noting that maybe when the games get a little bit more intense, he's going to feel more of a need to try and take over, and that could complicate the system a little bit. But even then, if you want to give Chovy resources, just give Chovy resources. It's not like he's a bad carry or anything like that. It's just he really hasn't been that guy for Gen.G this year. He's played a lot of carry-oriented picks, but not a lot of aggression has actually gone towards the mid lane. Peanut has done a very good job of teaming up with Lehens to create a lot of plays, not only around Dragon in this Dragon meta, but obviously around bot lane in that same vein. Ruler gets so much pumped into him. They play such an early game style here. A lot of Lucian Nami, a lot of Yuumi here, a lot of things that can really dominate a laning phase if you get ahead. And so they really want to pump into Ruler to make sure that he has that early lead. He does a better job than anybody in the world at transitioning that early lead into a late game advantage, because not only is he better at all of these champions than anybody else, but he just simply understands where he needs to be at every given moment. His objective control is phenomenal. His ability to stay alive in team fights, even on risky picks like Lucian later in the game, is truly unbelievable, and he's very deserving of the MVP. Obviously, I'm not going to keep repeating myself, but Ruler is awesome, and this team knows it. They build around him, they play into him, but they have more avenues than that. Obviously, Chovy can be played into. Peanut at one time was known as a carry jungler. Obviously, that stigma is a little bit gone now with the past few teams that he's played on. But man, like at one time, this guy was known as the jungler you wanted to pump your resources into because he could carry you games. And obviously, I still believe he can do that. Not only is he a very good player, he basically reinvented the current meta that we sit in with his ability to bring Poppy to the forefront. I think a lot of people forgot that no one was playing Poppy jungle, and then Peanut started destroying people on Poppy jungle because it stopped a lot of the major threats in the meta right now, and all of a sudden everybody in the world is playing Poppy jungle, and it basically defines what a good jungler in the meta can look like. That's Peanut's doing, and that's the kind of control I think he has and the kind of mind he has for jungle as a position. Now, where are the weaknesses? Because this team has to have them. No team is perfect. Every team is beatable. And I agree. Gen.G is beatable. Now, it's going to be a 1 in a million shot because I really think this team is pretty much top to bottom as talented as you could possibly get. But sometimes Lehens overextends and it can put Ruler in uncomfortable positions as well. Those two aren't always on the same mental page in terms of the aggression that they want to play with. And that's not to say that they're always off of that page, but there have been times where those two have gotten a little bit disconnected in terms of their willingness to go in. Lehens wants to go, and Ruler sometimes just wants to farm it out and get to that point in the game, especially on picks like Zeri and Jinx. You can take advantage of that. If you can get your bot lane ahead, that can usually put you in a position where hopefully you can set yourself up to at least team fight in a relatively good manner. I'm not saying you're going to win that team fight because Gen.G's also great from behind, but it is worth noting that it's not game over as soon as it's not game over as soon as you step on the rift. You can still win a matchup here with Gen.G if you take advantage of their weaknesses. There's also Doran in the top lane, and I like Doran as a weak side top laner. He's very good at it, but at the same time, he is easily the weakest player on this team, and I think if you're really looking for a lane to be able to exploit, Doran has shown that he is sometimes in that conversation. He does like to play his aggressive picks here. The Gnar, the Gangplank, those are two picks that, while they can be safe in lane, they can also be exploitable with good jungle attention. So it's going to be up to you to make sure that you can out-macro Gen.G, which is a big, big task to ask, but at the same time, it's not impossible. We've seen T1 be able to do it earlier this year in Week 4. It's just not something that I would sit here and rest my shoulders on. I really think that this team has so many good things going for it, and the weaknesses are almost completely negligible when you talk about the good things they have. Moving on to the number 2 team here in the LCK, and the top 2 Giants, of course, are sitting with buys, and they're always going to be fun to talk about. We got done talking about Gen.G. It's time to talk about T1. Now, this is the team that went undefeated in spring, and then, unfortunately, wasn't able to bring it home at MSI, but still, the amount of talent on this team should not be forgotten. This was a team that was, just a couple of months ago, looking completely unbeatable, even by this Gen.G super team. And so I think there are a lot of things to talk about when it comes to T1. 1. Their win of the split, obviously, was huge over Gen.G. They weren't able to repeat it later in the year, but splitting 1-1 with them is still a really good sign. But they've had a couple of really questionable losses. They lost for no reason to KDF in Week 3. Obviously, KDF not even making playoffs here. It's a team that never really looked like they were in contention for playoffs anyways, at least after the first couple of weeks. It's a really rough loss on their resume. They also have a loss to Liiv SANDBOX, which isn't the most, it isn't the worst loss in the world, but it is something worth noting, and I think it defines kind of exactly what this T1 team is, which is a super big powerhouse for the first 15 minutes of the game. And they usually get so out of control by that point that it's very difficult to team fight into them because they have a comp centered around what their carry is in that game in order for them to be able to take over. And I think that really shows it, right? Like, who are the star players on this team? Well, first of all, most of them. But in terms of how they want to play it, Zeus gets a lot of resources in the mid game, but early game, it's a lot of Owner just trying to make stuff happen across the map. Look at the champions that he's played. He's played a lot of Lee Sin, a lot of Viego, a lot of Xin Zhao. These are champions that want to duel at level 4. These are champions that want to go into the enemy jungle and play aggressive, and his team does a really good job of backing them up. Faker has, like I said earlier, taken a backseat role, I think, for a majority of the year, has definitely played a lot with Owner as that secondary piece. You see a lot of Galio, you see a lot of Lissandra. Picks like that, I think, definitely show you the style that this team was going for quite a bit, and I think it kind of summarizes the whole outline of what they are. If this team gets ahead, if this team does really well in the early game, I have a very hard time seeing how they lose that game because they do such a great job of strangleholding the life out of the enemy teams once they have a lead. Their macro is immaculate, and their early game plays are great. Their planned plays are phenomenal. Now, where we've seen this team struggle is when they go up against other teams who are very good in the early game. KDF isn't that. They have a couple of really good early games and they were able to take a series great, but Liiv SANDBOX absolutely is. This is a team that does a great job of maximizing its windows, as I'll talk about later. Krako does a great job of knowing exactly when he needs to make plays, most notably bot lane, to get his team advantages. He really does a great job of tracking, and that really hurt T1 in their matchup against them in this past week. When they are down and when they have a deficit, they sometimes find it hard to regain control, not because they're bad players, but because I just don't think that's the play style that this team has grown accustomed to. We see that a lot with the picks. Like I said, the Lee Sin, the Xin Zhao, I think, make a lot of sense. The Galio make a lot of sense for that. But even in the bot lane, Gumayushi's most played ADC this split is Draven. And yes, Draven's really good in the meta right now, but Draven is someone who you need to get snowballing in order for him to really maximize his potential. I think this just really shows off the idea that T1 is going for with, let's get this game completely out of control so we can just steamroll in the late game. They have some really good late game team fighters. That's really what Zeus is for. If they do get to that mid to late game and Guma isn't completely out of control and Owner isn't completely out of control, Zeus does a really good job of corralling the enemy team. His engages on Gnar are unlike almost anybody in the world. He does a great job of consistently being able to do damage, not only on the Gnar, but on picks like the Gangplank, picks like the Gwen, the things that are very good in this meta. He's shown a propensity to be able to do well on. Obviously, he's played the Sejuani some bit as well, but they don't typically like him on these full-blown tanks because they do want to give him some agency in the late game to be able to recover if things go wrong on the other sides of the map. And so, I think there is a huge success point to this. They are so good in the early game that a lot of times teams just aren't going to be able to compete with them. And if they are the better team, they will oftentimes look like it because they will go out there and they will execute on their game plan and they will just snowball the game out of control. But if they're maybe feeling a little lackadaisical, if they maybe don't have a concrete strategy in the early 15 minutes, which I'm not worried about too much for playoffs, but we saw that in the regular season, they can sometimes struggle against teams that are worse than them. We saw that against KDF. We saw that against SANDBOX, where they just weren't on that same level because it just didn't feel like they had that same locked-in mentality in the early game. I don't imagine that will be a problem in playoffs, but it is something to note. So those are really your big pros and cons. Really, at the end of the day, this is one of the most talented teams in the world. They went 16-0 in the spring regular season for a reason. You arguably have the best top laner, the best support. You have the GOAT in the mid lane. You have two of the best young players in the world in Owner and Guma. Like, I don't doubt that this team has the talent to be able to make it work. It's really just about, can they execute on the game plan that they've been showing all year long? Or are they going to throw us a curveball and really change up how they wanted to play? They did that in their final series of the year last week, and it really surprised a lot of people. I think this T1 team is going to be very intriguing to watch in the playoffs, and I'm really hoping we get a fun series between them and pretty much anybody. All right, now that we've gone over the top two teams, we actually get to some teams that are playing in the first round. So we're going to go over both of the first round matchups here that are confirmed in the LCK. We're going to kick things off with our 3 versus 6 matchup. Now, this one is one I'm incredibly excited to talk about in general. Of course, I am talking about Liiv SANDBOX versus DRX. This is a series I have been stoked, absolutely stoked, to talk about all week because I think it's an incredibly interesting matchup. I actually think we got probably the most interesting set of matchups in the first round that we could have possibly gotten. Let's talk about SANDBOX first. Obviously, this is a team that overperformed everybody's expectations. This is a team that I didn't think was going to be very good this year, quite frankly. I was really concerned about their bottom lane in spring, but they bring Prince in towards the back half of spring. You know, they're trying out a bunch of different bot laners. They settle on Prince, and they want to go with him for summer. Boom. MVP caliber player, completely takes over the scene and the team and really propels this team up to top 3. A phenomenal year for SANDBOX. They've got to be very, very happy with how they played. They also found a complete diamond in the rough here in Kale at support. I've talked quite frequently about those two. I think they complement each other basically perfectly, and I actually think Krako is also a really good complement to Prince and Kale because Krako isn't honestly the most mechanically talented player in the world. He doesn't often win jungle matchups in terms of actively, you know, outplaying the other jungler. It's more of a mental outplay. He does a really good job of getting his laners ahead, and even if he doesn't have a lot of gold, he does such a good job at facilitating the rest of his team that it really doesn't matter, and he wasn't always this player. He wasn't this player last year. I think the addition of somebody of the caliber of Prince has really unlocked arguably the best of Krako, and I think that that's really, really awesome to see. They were really, really solid this season overall, but, I mean, it's the bot lane. I've talked about it all year long. It's the bot lane. When this bot lane wins, they win. When they lose, they lose. Like, they are the lifeblood, the heart and soul of Liiv SANDBOX. They are everything that this team has. That is for good and for bad. Now, obviously, DRX is a little bit different. They have a very good bot lane. I will give them that, or at least a very good bot laner. But quite frankly, over the course of the year, they've just not been able to step up to Liiv SANDBOX. They've lost to them twice, 2-1. And in both series, it really just didn't look like they were nearly as good of a team, as a cohesive unit. I think DRX certainly has its moments. We've talked about it all year long. The most stop-start team in the LCK, the amount of weeks in a row that this team has gone 2-0, and then 0-2, and then 2-0, and then 0-2, is actually incredible. They have talent on this team. Zika made my second team All-Pro in the mid lane position. He's been that good this year. Deft, I think, while being a little overrated, I think, by a majority of the fan base, I think is still a very good bot laner. One of the top 4 to 5 in the region, absolutely for sure. And he's got something to prove with this being his last split in the LCK. We know Pioshik can play. We know Beryl can play. Both of them have been so ridiculously inconsistent this year, though. They have been huge hindrances to this DRX team. Pioshik at times has looked like a top 3-ish jungler in the world, and then at other times has looked like someone you can't even play in the LCS. Like, there's no middle ground for Pioshik. He's either the best player in the game or the worst player in the game, and that can be good, but it can also be bad for DRX. And Beryl has honestly adopted a similar mentality and a similar playstyle. Beryl, by most reports, I think pretty much anybody would say over the past few years, has been the best support in the world. Maybe with the exception of Keria, like you want to put those two against each other, whatever, but Beryl hasn't been far off, no matter what you want to say. He was not good this year. There's really no other way to put it. He was easily this team's worst player over the majority of the year, and that is incredibly disappointing to say. A lot of people were talking about him as this macro god that was going to come into DRX and really be the glue piece to make everything fit together. It has not worked like that. They have won in spite of Beryl, and they really need a lot of turnaround from him in order for this to work. And then you have King in the top lane versus Dove. It's really probably just going to be a tank matchup. Both are tank players, and I imagine it's going to be a relatively boring thing, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But yeah, these two teams match up incredibly interestingly against each other. And I think the biggest example of that is going to be my key matchup of the series, and this should come as pretty much no surprise to anybody. My key matchup of the series is going to be in the bottom lane here, Prince versus Deft. Kind of the lifebloods of both of these teams. Obviously, Prince has been the guy for Liiv SANDBOX, but Deft has honestly been the guy for DRX, at least in terms of consistency. While Zika, I think, has been their main carry, Deft has been the one that I think you're always going to rely on to be able to stop the gates from flooding. And I think that that is going to be a really interesting matchup here. If Prince can really get out to an amazing lead here, obviously we see his stats. He's top 2 in almost every single major stat for bot laners in the region. If he can get out to a major lead here, I find it very unlikely that DRX is able to compete with that. Once Prince is ahead, especially on the SANDBOX team with how they play the late game, I find it very difficult for any team to really be able to combat that, even some of the top teams in the region. But Deft is not going to roll over and die quite like a lot of Prince's other opponents have. Prince is very used to getting leads, and I think Deft could be someone that it might be a little difficult to get a lead on. Obviously, his gold at 15 or his gold difference at 15 isn't astoundingly great, but it's relatively neutral, and that's kind of what Deft gives you, which is this player that is really good at going neutral, and that's good for DRX overall because they have other parts of the map that can get ahead. I think there's a huge mismatch in the mid lane with Zika versus Closer that you can take advantage of as DRX, as long as Prince is not out of control. And so, definitely a matchup I'm going to be looking forward to. I think the difference in these two players is really going to determine a lot of what we see out of these two teams when they clash. Moving on to our other matchup of round 1 here, and both of these matchups are so fun to talk about. I'm really excited to talk about our 4-5 matchup here. Of course, I am referring to DAMWON KIA taking on KT Rolster. Now, these two split in the regular season. They both won a series against each other, and both were 2-0s. So, this is definitely a little bit of an intriguing matchup here, and I actually think both of these teams match up relatively interestingly. We'll talk about DAMWON first instead of the higher seed. This is a team that has been inconsistent throughout the year. Obviously, the highs of DAMWON are DAMWON. They've really been the only team in the league, maybe other than SANDBOX and like one series of KT Rolster, to be able to hang with Gen.G and T1. And that's a really impressive thing to say. Obviously, this team's talent, we know what it is. It's Nuguri, Canyon, Showmaker in the top side. That is a world championship winning top side of the map. That's not up for debate. It's happened. Now, obviously, they haven't been playing up to standards and up to what they've expected to be over the course of the year, especially those solo laners, but at the end of the day, the talent is absolutely there, and what DAMWON has shown consistently over the course of the last 2 years is that even if they're not performing perfectly all year long, when the games matter and when the games get important, they are going to succeed. They are going to step up to the plate, and I very much believe that. Obviously, I believe we're going to get a better version of Nuguri. I believe we're going to get a better version of Showmaker than what we got in the regular season. I think we're going to get the best version of Canyon. And I'm really hoping that we get that because this DAMWON KIA team is a little bit desperate without that. DECTUM and Kellen are a good bot lane. They're not a great bot lane. They can be a little bit of a weak spot for this DAMWON KIA team. I don't think they're bad. I just don't think they've been great. DECTUM is someone who I think at multiple points in the season has definitely been caught overextending, and it's been a little bit of a negative for DAMWON overall. But Kellen, I think, is relatively underrated as a support. I think he's done a very good job of corralling DECTUM, and honestly, I think a big reason why Canyon is able to be so successful is Kellen does a great job of playing the macro game with him. And honestly, I think Kellen at this point is pretty underrated just as a support overall, even if, you know, this bot lane as a package isn't exactly the strongest in the league. But moving on to KT Rolster, they're interesting in a very similar way to someone like Liiv SANDBOX, where I think they have a very clear playstyle of what they want to do, especially recently. They want to take Cuz, and they want to go to the bot lane. They want to get aiming ahead. If aiming is ahead, they feel very confident about their chances to win a team fight. This dude is 9-0 this split on Aphelios. That is absolutely ludicrously good, and I imagine that's something that they're going to prioritize. Obviously, DECTUM's signature champion is Aphelios as well. Something to keep in mind. That's going to be a very high priority pick, in my opinion, this series. But if aiming can get ahead, if aiming can get on the ball, I really don't know that there's a lot that DAMWON can do to stop that. And that's going to be what KT Rolster focuses on in this series. Now, the things that I'm worried about for KT, Cuz. Cuz is the first thing that comes to mind. Not only has he been very inconsistent over the course of the year, but now you're going into Playoff Canyon, and that is something that I'm going to be very, very concerned about. There's a chance that that jungle matchup just goes heavily in favor of DAMWON, and that is definitely a worry. And then you have the mid lane matchup. You have a rookie in Vikla, and yes, Vikla, I think, has steadily been getting better over the course of the season, but you've got a rookie in Vikla going against Showmaker in the playoffs. Like, that is definitely a concerning matchup as well. So, some positives, some negatives. I'm worried about the jungle mid matchup for KT, but I'm worried about the bot lane matchup when it comes to DAMWON, where I think KT definitely has a significant edge. Where does that leave us? Well, that leaves us at our key matchup of the series, and of course, that is going to be the top lane matchup. I think this is really going to determine a lot for how this series ends up going. Nuguri versus Rascal, I think, is a very fun 2v2. Not only is this probably the most even 1v1, and potentially, like, if you bring junglers up, 2v2, that you have in this series, where I think both players are actively good, but I think both players play very aggressive and risky play styles. You look at the stats that these two have. Rascal's stats don't look amazing, but he has a great KDA, and most importantly, he has a great KP percentage. He's involved in a lot of what KT wants to do, and I've hyped him up. His mechanics are phenomenal, and overall, I do think he's been better this split than someone like Nuguri, but Nuguri overall, I think, plays a more cohesive style for his team. There have been moments, especially towards the end of the season, where I've been very concerned with how he has played and how he's been over-aggressive. Someone like Rascal could take advantage of that, but at the same time, Rascal's guilty of the exact same thing on KT Rolster, and Nuguri is definitely the kind of talent that can take advantage of that. Look at their KDAs, they're basically identical. This matchup, I think, is going to be very important, especially if things go as expected, with jungle mid going the way of DAMWON and bot lane going the way of KT Rolster. I think this top lane matchup could determine a lot of what we see out of the DAMWON KT matchup. I actually think this series is maybe a little bit more even than people are giving it credit for, and I think this top lane matchup is certainly going to be fun to watch, even if it's not the most competitive every single game. All right, that is my analysis, not only for all 6 teams in the LCK playoffs, but of both of our first round matchups, which I find are incredibly interesting. Now, it is time for my bracket predictions here before playoffs kick off. A lot of interesting ones. This one won't be nearly as long as the LPL one was, obviously a much different format, but definitely not lacking on the suspense. So, up on your screen now, you're going to see the bracket. Let's go ahead and fill it out together here. We're going to start with our 3-6 matchup here. Liiv SANDBOX taking on DRX. Now, obviously, I've talked about it. I think Liiv SANDBOX is the better team. I'm not a superstitious man. Obviously, if I was, I would think a little bit more about DRX here because of the 0-2 into 2-0, and then 0-2 into 2-0, and then 0-2 and then 2-0. They went 0-2 last week. That means a 3-0's coming. I just don't see it in the cards. I am a little bit worried about this DRX team. I think Liiv SANDBOX should be able to get it done. Now, with the second round matchups, there is a selection here. I'm going to put Liiv SANDBOX on the bottom side. I don't think there is any world, in my opinion, where Gen.G thinks about playing Liiv over playing one of the other two teams. However, I do think it is a little bit closer if DAMWON makes it through. I think DAMWON could be an interesting matchup to actually see maybe play against T1. Gen.G might pick Liiv SANDBOX over them, but overall, I think, generally speaking, Liiv will probably be the one that's not selected by Gen.G in terms of playing in the next round. So we're going to slot them in against T1 in that second round. But yeah, Liiv SANDBOX is the better team. Prince should be able to gain a pretty large advantage on DRX, as he has done multiple times throughout the season, and just be able to carry it home. I'm a little bit worried about Pioshit going into Krakow as well. I think that's something that could definitely go SANDBOX's way. But moving to our second series here, in the first round, on the bottom side, we've got DAMWON taking on KT. Now, this is a very intriguing matchup, but for me, I think it's pretty obviously going to be DAMWON. I really like the matchup that DAMWON has against KT in particular. I think the jungle mid difference is just going to be absolutely huge. I think Canyon has the opportunity to completely take over this series going against someone like Cuz. And I think even with Showmaker not playing at his absolute best, he should be a notch above someone like Vikla, unfortunately. And that should be the difference here for DAMWON. Even if aiming is put in a good spot late game, I have a hard time finding a situation where they have enough left on that side of the team for them to consistently win. So for me, I'm going to pick DAMWON here, and I'm gonna say it pretty confidently. I'll say it's a 3-1 or a 3-0. As for SANDBOX DRX, I didn't give a series. That should be theoretically a 3-0. But DRX could make some of these games interesting. Like I said, they're an incredibly talented team. They just haven't put it together. So I'll say 3-1 for DRX. I'll give them 1. Moving on to the second round, though, we've now got our big matchups here. We'll start with the top side. Gen.G taking on DAMWON. A super fun matchup here, I think, between two teams. But for me, it's pretty easily Gen.G. They just have the talent advantage. I think that's what DAMWON's still holding on to, is the fact that while they haven't shown the consistency of it, the top of their game has still been pretty impressive, but Gen.G's top of the game is even more impressive and even higher. So for me, it's a pretty easy Gen.G choice here to move on to finals. This should be a 3-0, but I could see DAMWON taking a game if Canyon or Showmaker completely pops off. But at the end of the day, Gen.G is just the better team, and I expect them to show that. Moving down into the bottom side, though, our second semifinal matchup here, we've got T1 taking on Liiv SANDBOX, and this is an incredibly interesting series here because a lot of people have been talking about how Gumayusi's been a little bit of the weak link, or at least in a lot of people's eyes, the weak link of T1, and he's got to go up against Prince in this theoretical matchup. I think that could be a very intriguing one for SANDBOX, but at the end of the day, T1 is just too good. I think they're turning it on at the right time. They know the strategy that they want to play, and really the biggest problem that T1 has is not getting ahead in the early game. As long as they can play their early game focused and with good, good macro and good decision making, not making the mistakes that they made in week 9, I think they should be able to beat Liiv SANDBOX and move on to grand finals, which is of course Gen.G and T1, the top two teams. Now, this should go to 5 games. I really believe that. I think a lot of people are sleeping on what T1's output is going to be in the playoffs. I think these two teams are significantly more evenly matched than maybe what a lot of people would see just out of records or how T1 is shown maybe in their worst series. But at the same time, I'm doing it. I'm picking T1 to be my LCK Summer Champions. A lot of people are going to be very, very surprised by that, but I really have confidence that this T1 team is going to turn it on at the right time. I think Faker is going to get his carry game on a little bit more Ari, a little bit more Azir, a little bit less of the Galio, a little bit less of the Lissandra. I think we're going to see come out. I think I really like their strategy of just being able to take over the early game. I could see that as something that Gen.G actually struggles with. I talked about this in my analysis of Gen.G. They are vulnerable of playing a little bit too aggressive. Someone like Lehens definitely has fallen into that trap. And I definitely think T1 is the kind of team that would actively be able to take advantage of mistakes like that if they were continuous throughout a series. So for me, even though it's a little bit of an upset, I'm going to pick T1 to be your LCK Summer Champions and to head to Worlds as the _1 seed out of the LCK. But that is going to do it. That is my LCK 2022 Summer Playoffs Playoff Primer video. We went over everything. We went over the awards. We went over all of the teams, the first round matchups, and my full bracket prediction. Obviously, you guys aren't going to agree with everything I said in this video. There are going to be some major disagreements, and I love to chat it up with you guys down in the comment section below. Some people are going to want KT over DK. Some people are going to want Gen.G over T1. In fact, some people are going to want Liiv over T1. So a lot of discussions I'm really excited to have down in the comment section below. But we put so much effort into this video, creating not only all the graphics, but, brainstorming all the things we wanted to do for it. If you guys did enjoy what you saw here, please go ahead and leave a like. And like I said, if you want to subscribe and hit that bell, if you really are enjoying the Playoff Primer series, we've got a bunch more content, not only the primers, but also playoff analysis coming out over the course of the next few weeks. I would highly recommend doing that if you want to see the content that I'm posting on this channel. And of course, leaving that like really does mean a lot to me. But with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.